Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Grit and Glamour. I'm your host, Ruby Veridiano, and on today's episode, we're going to be talking about a career in a corporate philanthropic foundation. Now, when I was earlier on in my career and I was trying to figure out a path towards social responsibility in the fashion and luxury industry, I wasn't sure which way to go, but corporate foundations, which a lot of fashion companies have, was a path that I was exploring. So if this is something that interests you, then this episode is for you. We're going to be talking to Shawna Carroll-Wilthien about her role in a corporate foundation and whether it is a viable path on the road towards real social change and social impact. So without further ado, let's go ahead and bring Shawna onto the show where she is broadcasting from London today.
Hi, Ruby.
Hi, Shawna. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing so well. Thank you so much for coming on board and joining us today. I want to start off by just having you explain a little bit about your background because you're obviously based in London now, but people might be like, why doesn't she have a British accent? So let's start off with your background and where you're from.
Sure. Well, first, thank you for inviting me. I'm super honored to be part of the show. So thank you so much. So my background is, I'm American. But I moved to France when I was 9 years old and spent about 8 years living in France until I was 17 and then moved back to the US. So I pretty much kind of spent half of my life in the US and half of my life in France. I moved back to the US for my last year of high school and then did my undergrad in the US and then decided to move back to France after graduating from college and was there for about 10 years and now just moved to London in September. So new experience, starting not under the best conditions currently, but
Yes. No, but it's good to have you. And, because I have a lot of Filipino women who watch the show, I always like to shout out the fact that you are Pinay on your mom's side. So just wanted to let everybody know.
I am. My maternal grandfather was Filipino, and it's funny because it's not something that you can tell a lot just by looking at me.
Although from the very beginning.
Yeah, some people see it immediately and some people are like, what? And then some people think, oh, are you like Latina or do you have family that's like Native American or something? Which when they ask me that, I always think they've never actually seen a Native American person, but people just kind of get confused when they see me. But it's always been something that's been like a really important part of me and that I've been super proud of, that I'm a quarter Filipino, and I always feel a little uncomfortable whenever I have to fill out a form, and I don't want to put like, Asian American, because I really feel like I can't claim that, but at the same time, I feel like I'm always ignoring a little piece of myself.
Yeah, you can claim it. But anyway, this show is about grit and glamour, right? Because I really created the show as a way to educate and mentor the next generation of fashion change makers. And I think because we live in like this world of social media where people don't really see the journey, they just see the end result. I'm really intentional about having folks really share what it took to get them to where they're at today. So I know that you love your job and, you are in a position that really inspires you, but can you share with us a little bit about the background and what it took to get there?
Sure, of course. So I kind of started out my career when I was in college. I was working full-time as a paralegal for a bankruptcy lawyer. And I did that full-time while in college full-time for 5 years. And it's interesting because bankruptcy really has no link to what I'm doing now. But at the same time, like, we were helping people that were facing extreme financial hardship and helping them kind of like take a step into something new in their lives and put something in the past and get to a better place. So, and I think I've always had the desire to work in something that was useful. So even though that wasn't something that was like specifically related to anything I wanted to do maybe later in the future, I still had this connection with people and we were helping them through a difficult time. So it was something that was really important to me. And as I mentioned, after I graduated from college, I moved back to Paris. And I had wanted to work in the nonprofit sector. That was kind of my idea after graduating from college. I got a degree in international studies and really wanted to work in the nonprofit sector. And since I had my experience as a paralegal or a legal assistant in North Carolina, I sort of maybe a little bit naively thought that I could move to France and get a job as an assistant in a nonprofit organization and kind of work my way up from there. But I mean, as you know, in France, it's a little bit maybe more complicated than it is in the US to kind of start at the bottom and work your way up. I mean, I think it is possible in some situations, but it's definitely not an easy, natural route.
Yeah.
So I was able to find a job pretty quickly when I moved back to Paris, working in a nonprofit organization focusing on human rights. But I very quickly just wasn't feeling like I was thriving in my position. I didn't really have any interesting tasks to do. It just kind of got really boring really fast, and I felt like underutilized. Like I had days where I wasn't really doing anything all day long, and which is like the worst feeling at work, to feel like useless. So I did have the opportunity to like kind of attach myself to projects that were being implemented by other departments, which was great, and that was a really exciting part of my job.
Yeah.
But I also realized that in France, I wasn't really going to be able to do much other than be an assistant, because that's kind of how people had pegged me, unless I got a master's degree. So I decided to apply to schools and got accepted at Sciences Po in a master's degree in international security. And so I did that for 2 years while I was also working part-time doing something completely different. And then after that, I think it's really at Sciences Po actually that I realized that I wanted to focus my career on gender equality. I think I've always been sensitive to social injustice, generally speaking, but I feel like the news reports about things related to women and girls and gender inequalities just like were some of the things that got my blood boiling the most. So it was kind of like, oh, you've spent like, 25 years of your life trying to figure it out what it is that you want to work in. And it's like, well, you've always kind of gravitated toward this subject. In college, anytime there was a class on like women, I didn't major in women's studies, but I did take classes like in international studies related to women. And when I was working at the nonprofit organization, I worked on a project related to women in the Arab revolutions because of that time. So I was like, you're always gravitating toward this subject, so why not just work in this subject? That would make sense. So after college, my last year at Sciences Po, my last semester, I wrote all of my papers about women. If it was, a class on Pakistan, I wrote my paper on women in Pakistan, just so I can kind of try to specialize myself in that specific area. And so I decided to really dedicate my career to working in gender equality. And I was lucky to be able to get an internship at the French Ministry for Women's Rights after graduating. And that was at the time when there was an actual standalone French Ministry for Women's Rights. Now it's been downgraded to something a little bit different. But I did that for a few months. And then I worked for a couple of other nonprofit organizations based in Paris, working on women's health or women's empowerment. But it was often, I love how you call it grit, because that's definitely what it felt like at the time. Like it was, there were some struggles there. I ended up with a lot of short-term positions, or with, managers that might have been a little bit complicated to work with in the long term. And so it was a struggle.
Yeah.
But after a few years of doing that, because I kind of did like a little detour working for the Franco-American Fulbright Commission, which sends Americans to France to do like study abroad programs, or researchers to do like a research project with a different university. And then they send French people to the US to do something similar. So it wasn't really related to what I wanted to do, but it was kind of like a transition job that I did for a few months. And after that, I decided, I really want to go back to what it is that I'm interested in, and doing something that I feel like is really useful. So I decided to get some field experience, because I knew that working in nonprofit organizations or kind of in the development sector, field experience is important. And it wasn't something I was really able to do before. It's when you're financially independent and, paying for all of your own bills, like taking time off to go live abroad for a couple months can be complicated. So I just decided to go do a 1-month mission in the Philippines, because obviously I had an interest in the Philippines, and went and volunteered for 2 organizations, actually, one based in the Philippines and one based out of Paris, working with children that were living in slum areas around Cebu City. And the program was aimed to help them get through school. So I volunteered in the Philippines for a month, and it was an amazing experience, and just really kind of confirmed that that's the area that I wanted to be working in. And when I came back to Paris, I worked as a consultant for the NGO that was based in Paris, focusing exclusively on women's empowerment. It's kind of like a Kickstarter for development projects for women. So I worked there for a year, and then had the great opportunity to apply for the job that I have now. and was able to get hired.
Yeah.
That was about 4 years ago. It'll be 4 years in April that I started working at the foundation I work at now. So
yes. We're going to talk a little bit more about obviously your role there, but I just want to reflect back and pull a couple of nuggets of wisdom from your reflection there, because one, you said that you gravitated towards what makes your blood boil, right? Like a lot of times people are looking for their purpose. And I think the main key to figuring out what your purpose is what makes you angry, right? What makes you angry, and how do you want to play a part in not being angry anymore, but actually doing something about it? So if anybody out there is listening, try to reflect on what makes your blood boil, just like Shawna did. And then think about where you can insert your skill sets to be a solution to that problem. And then second, for those who are interested in working overseas in a place like Paris or France, you mentioned that it's very different. It's in the US, there's a little bit more leniency on how to changing industries. And employers in the US are generally open to taking on relevant experience, and they take that into account. Whereas in France, very specific, like if you don't have experience in this particular industry, you have to start all the way from the bottom. And you have to specialize in that. And there's, there's beauty, but also a lot of limitations in that kind of approach. So for folks who want to, consider a career in France, just something to think about. And then what was the third thing that I wanted to reflect on? I might be losing my train of thought, but I think we'll stop there for now, and I'll come back to it later. But let's talk a little bit about your current role. On the flyer, it does say Program M&E Officer. Can you tell us what that means?
Yeah, so I basically currently have two roles at the foundation. One is I'm in charge of following all of the projects that we're currently supporting in Asia. So I'm part of what we call at the foundation the international team. So the foundation that I work with, we work across the globe. We have are supporting projects in about 35 countries. And we have projects in the United States and Mexico and Haiti, which we call the US program. And then we have projects in Europe, which we call the Europe program. And then we have projects which are in Africa, Latin America, the Middle East, and Asia, which we call the international program. And I'm part of that team. And so I work, I follow all of the projects that we currently have in Asia. We have about 13 at the moment. So basically, when I do the whole process from like finding the right projects to support, submitting them through our governance to be approved. And then once they're approved, doing all of the admin of getting the contracts ready, and then following that partnership throughout the life of the partnership. So we have our partners are meant to send us like reports every 6 months, and we do follow-up calls with them to see how the projects are going. Back in the days before COVID, we went and visited all of the projects that we support. Clearly that hasn't been possible in about a year, but that's an important part of the job as well. And then the M&E piece stands for monitoring and evaluation. And that's a little bit different because all of the program officers or program managers at the foundation monitor and evaluate each of the programs that they work in. But my part is more global, where I'm trying to look at what is the foundation's impact across all of the entire portfolio of projects that we have. Right. So we have about 95, I think, currently. So just trying to like find some indicators where we can track outcomes across our portfolio to see where are the key areas where we are having an impact. And I can talk a little bit more about impact later, but just looking at that and what impact are we having on our partners and on societies and systems as a whole. So just kind of having that like overarching view of the entire portfolio.
Just to scale back a little bit, because for folks who are not familiar with foundation work, essentially, your foundation funds different projects on the ground that then benefit local communities, right?
Exactly.
And so essentially what you're doing is you are also, you can't just fund a project and then trust that everything's working just fine. You have to have some key performance indicators to measure the change that funding is doing and so forth. So I just wanted to clarify that for those who are listening. And I really wanted to talk to you about this career path, because for so many folks who are wanting to work in social responsibility and fashion, I think for me, when I was starting out, I didn't really know what path there was to take, and a lot of folks are very familiar now with like sustainability in terms of sustainable fashion and so forth. But this is another part of the industry that could be a potential fit for people who do want to merge, their interest in fashion with like their passion for social change. But I think, just hearing from you, it's maybe not the most, maybe, there's a lot of glamour that's attached to fashion, but there's also a lot of hard work. I think you can attest to that.
Definitely.
Yeah. So, what does a corporate foundation entail exactly, right? Like, how do different foundations decide what kind of causes to work on, and how do companies choose like their social impact focus?
Yeah, well, I think it really depends on the company. I mean, some companies decide to focus on supporting causes that are linked to their key area of work. For example, there's an electricity company that has a foundation and they support bringing electricity to communities that don't have electricity.
Yeah.
Or a company that works on water, their foundation's focus might be on water. And there are actually corporate foundations working in the fashion industry that do work specifically on fashion, like trying to improve human rights within the fashion industry or the supply chain and different things like that. The foundation I work with is decided to have a foundation that's completely separate from the business.
Yeah.
So I think the way that we chose, or the the powers that be, the company chose the focus areas, looking back at the history of the founder and trying to do something that would honor that person. So that's another avenue, I think, as well. Some foundations also specifically want to work in the communities that they work in. I know, for example, in India, organizations or companies that make over a certain amount of money are required to give back a certain percentage of that revenue to the community. So some of them set up foundations and they work specifically on improving the lives of the people within their own communities.
Got it.
So
Yeah. And now
lots of different avenues.
Yeah, my follow-up question is, like, why do foundations exist at all? Like, tell us a little about that.
Yeah, well, I hope that for most of them, it's because they want to give back and they're realizing the importance of that. Of course, foundations do get a tax break for the money that they provide to their foundation. So that's probably for some the motivation as well. But I think more and more it's giving back to society, and I think that companies are having this reckoning more and more lately that they do have a responsibility to society, and they need to be a part of change and making things better, and not just part of this capitalist system where it's all about making money and selling things.
Yeah, no, and I mean, as you can see, a lot of the next generation, they're really vocal, they're very active, they're very much in tune with having a mission and a social justice approach to their lives and in their careers. But they're also very critical about brands and corporations, right? Rightfully so. So, corporations don't exactly have the most stellar reputation when it comes to social responsibility. So do you feel that the work that you're personally doing at your foundation is making a true impact? And if so, why?
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting that you say that, because definitely corporations don't have a good reputation for making social impact. And I think that is changing slowly. And I don't think that creating a foundation can be like the thing that you're saying that's just gonna, okay, I'm doing this one good thing and that's gonna be enough. So that's one thing. And the question about impact is really interesting, because a lot of nonprofit organizations, foundations, social enterprises are all trying to measure their impact, and that's part of my job and what I'm trying to do, and I'm wanting to focus on that more and more. And so we're trying to come out with like outcomes, like, we're supporting so many women to do this and so many women to do that. But I think a lot of times organizations are sort of losing track of like the actual impact that they're having on individual lives, and losing the value of that, and just trying to show the numbers, like we've supported thousands of people to do this. But for example, if you take just like, if you're supporting women to get jobs, for example, it's all great to say we've supported 5,000 women to get a job, but do we know if those women are getting a good job, a decent job? Are they making a livable wage? Is it actually improving their lives in any way, shape, or form? And so I think that it's kind of important to go back to that focus on looking at the actual stories of individuals and not just the numbers, because the numbers really, they're not saying much in the end, to be honest. So I think that in my view, that's how I can tell the work that we're that we're funding is having an impact, because when we are able to go to the field and talk to women and girls that are participating in the programs, and we hear directly from them, like, participating in this program has helped me, improve my life in this way and that way. I think there's real value in those simple stories.
Yeah.
And we get reports back from our partners as well, where they, try to send us stories from the field as well. So
yeah. Is there an example of a particular story that's moved you personally into like when you like that you've witnessed on the field?
Well, it's not necessarily a story that I witnessed on the field, but one of our partners a couple years ago at an event we had organized was sharing a story of a girl in India that participated in one of the programs. This is a project that we are funding in India, where they have integrated, they call it like a resilience program, into the curriculum of these residential schools that were created for girls in this very vulnerable community in a certain state of India. And so the program is all about like teaching them like resilience and self-agency and being able to advocate for themselves. And it just improves all of these different aspects of their like physical and mental health. And one thing that he was saying was that, there's this girl, she participated in the program after finishing school. Her parents put her into a marriage that she didn't want to be a part of. So the program wasn't able to prevent her going into that marriage, but she suffered abuse in the marriage, and she was able to escape. And she was able to escape and go back home and say, I'm not going back to that situation. And those are some of the skills that she learned in that program to like be able to advocate for herself. Like even if it didn't prevent the marriage from happening, she was able to escape and not go back because of the skills that she had learned.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. And you're right about like, sometimes we're focused on the numbers and we're focused on the measurement but there's macro change, but the micro stories are also super important. And that's where the real change is happening.
And change is something that happens in the long term. You can't really measure. If you're funding a project for 3 years, like you're not really going to know what the long-term impact on those people's lives are, because it's just too short. Like, especially in the field of gender equality, change is something that's going to that takes a long time. If we're talking about changing social norms and changing behaviors, like, I mean, if you're interested in this field at all and you see any other research that comes out from, different organizations saying that if we keep going on the path that we're going, it's going to take another 60 years or so for us to even achieve like pay equality. Like these are things that take a long time. So you have to trust also, I think, that some of these small changes, are also gonna have an effect on future generations as well. Yeah. And I think it's interesting. It's something that I really realized when I was in the Philippines as well. Kind of like a realization of, me coming in with my first field experience. My questions were like, okay, well, when these kids go to school, like when they finish school, are they actually going to be able to move out of the slum area, like, and move into something that's like more of like what we would consider like a more livable or decent living conditions. And I came to the realization that that's not necessarily the goal of the program, but just like that one child finishing school, they're going to be able to help their parents pay for their other siblings, for example, to finish school, and they might be able to get a better job, and it's going to trickle down through the generations. But the end goal isn't necessarily, get that one person into something that's what we would consider as like, living in like an apartment or something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, social responsibility is so daunting, right? And I think that is also like a barrier for people, but we just need to focus on what we can do as individuals and the individual changes that we're able to make, even if it's just a simple act of kindness. So I like that we can kind of bring it back to the individual, but I am trying to listen into like what my listeners might be thinking. They all practice critical thinking. They're all very highly educated and super socially conscious. And I know, again, that they are very critical over corporations. So I'm just kind of starting to like think ahead of what they might be reflecting on. A lot of folks might think that, well, because a corporation is doing so many bad things, does having a foundation actually cancel out, whatever good the foundation is doing with all the other bad stuff? So how would you approach this line of thinking?
No, I completely agree with that. I don't think that having a foundation is sufficient. If you're doing a bunch of bad things on the side,
Yeah.
it's really about integrating corporate social responsibility as part of your business practice as well. And some corporate foundations or some foundations are actually really integrated into the CSR departments of corporations as well. That's not necessarily the case at the foundation that I work at, but they do have like an entirely dedicated corporate social responsibility department that's doing a lot of things. And it's interesting, there are actually some nonprofit organizations I know of in France, for example, that won't accept funding from certain corporate foundations, like that are linked to petrol or something, because they don't agree with the overall business practices of those corporations. So it's kind of like they have like a blacklist of foundations that they won't even accept money from because it goes completely against their values. So yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Well, let's go back to your job. What do you love most about your job and what inspires you about it?
I think what I really love the most is connecting with our partners, and just hearing about the work that they're doing, and anytime we can help them through any struggles that they're facing or challenges, and making connections with other organizations as well. Like that's definitely one of my favorite pieces when I see, okay, this person's having this challenge and I know that this organization was facing something similar and they kind of found a solution that's working for them, and I can connect them, and they can, try to talk it through and see if they can help each other. Like, I think that's really great because nonprofits tend to continue to work in silos and do their programs on their own and not necessarily have a lot of opportunities to connect with others. So I really like to be able to create those opportunities. And of course, the field missions, anytime I was able to go to the field and actually go and see the programs for myself, because you just understand them so much better than when you're reading a document about it or, somebody's telling you about it. You actually get to go see on the field. And unfortunately, that hasn't been possible for a while, but that was definitely one of my favorite parts.
Yeah. And I know you've kind of touched on this a little bit already, but are there some examples that you could share about meaningful projects that you've gotten to work on?
Yeah, it's tough to pick only a few because I love all of the projects that we're working on. But so I gave the example of India earlier. Maybe I can give something that's completely different. Because when we're working in the field of gender equality, obviously, like no country in the world has achieved gender equality. So we're working on, topics that are really varied, and in contexts that are really varied as well, very diverse. So we have projects that are focusing on like very vulnerable communities and, very like poor areas, for example. And then we have a project in South Korea, for example, that's working with helping women who have interrupted their careers to take care of their children or after they got married or take care of family members, for example, and to help them get back into the workforce. And it's actually a major issue in South Korea with women. They call it the M curve of employment. So women, graduate from college and then go into the workforce in high numbers and then drop out dramatically once they get into their like mid 20s, 30s and start having children. And then a lot of times they don't necessarily really go back into the workforce, or they do it part-time, or it's many years later. So this program is working with women to help them get jobs in the social entrepreneurship sector, because they felt like that's the specialty of the organization, first of all. And they felt like it might be a sector that might be a little bit more flexible because it's all about innovation and, giving back to society. So raising awareness about this issue of women dropping out of the workforce, and trying to get women into those jobs, but also help companies develop better policies for families to give paternity leave, for example, to welcome women back in and like kind of create transition programs to help them get back into the workforce. They even opened up a daycare center they like created this building that's like a co-working space for social entrepreneurs. So they created like a daycare in the building for the parents that work in those companies, because there's like very, very little access to private childcare or public childcare in South Korea, because it's just expected that the moms will stop working and take care of their kids. So it's like looking at your average middle class, educated college woman that, has had to drop out of the workforce because that's just what's expected.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. There's so much to unpack there. That's going to be a different episode, but I want to keep us on track, but I love that you are on mission and that you're getting to do the work that you do, and you're, creating that impact for yourself, and you're able to use, like your work hours every day and really in service of something that you believe in and that you're passionate about. For those who are listening who want to potentially follow your footsteps into this career, what would you recommend in terms of skill sets that you think that they might need, or the type of education or preparation that they take in order to position themselves for a role like yours?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think it it depends on obviously the interest that you have. Like my interest was in was in gender equality, so I really focused my energy into gender equality. Like I said, my last year of my master's degrees, I wrote all of my papers on every single class, something related to women, so that I could specialize further in that sector. In France, it's not like there aren't a lot of organizations working on that. So I feel like I've contacted almost all of them. And was, did a lot of networking. I also would contact, women or men that were working in like diversity departments in different organizations. Anything that I could find that was connected to gender equality in any way, shape, or form, I was contacting those people, asking about their jobs and what they did, and how I might be able to get into the sector. And so, I volunteered as well for organizations in Paris, like the French Committee for UN Women, that obviously focuses entirely on those issues. I volunteered for them so that I could keep my foot in the door and continue to network in that sector. And I actually knew the former executive director of the foundation before I applied, which that's not why I got the job. I still had to go through the whole process, but I think it is helpful to make those connections as well, even though networking is always very frustrating because it might not happen until multiple years later. The fruits of that networking. Like
oh my God.
I met the executive director of the foundation when I was finishing my internship at the French Ministry for Women's Rights. So that was in 2012, I think, the end of 2012. And I got hired at the foundation in April 2017. So it was many, many years later, and I did multiple things in the meantime. But I think the networking is really, really, essential. And then because gender equality is also really linked to international development. I think going on that field mission was also really important, because field experience in this sector is important. And I know from when I had my interview back in the day, the fact that I had taken from my own time, even if it was a short mission, to go for 1 month on my own funds, to do that, I think that really showed to them that I was really committed to this cause, and that was helpful as well. So.
Yeah. I really thank you for sharing the transparency of what went on behind the scenes, because I think people expect that once they graduate that they're going to land that, whatever high paying job or whatnot. And the reality of it is it takes a long time to really see, the dues that you have to pay in order to get to that ideal situation. Some people might be lucky, right? Sometimes maybe you are able to find that path right away. But for those who may not be where they're at yet, or where they want to be at yet, I hope that this conversation encourages them and lets them know that it's just normal. I also have a similar journey. There's just so much that goes into pursuing your vision and your dreams. And especially if I always say, like, the harder the struggle, the greater the glory, because the more specific you are about what you want, I think it is a little bit more challenging. It does take more investment, because if you're just looking for whatever kind of job, of course, it's easy for you to find, whatever. But if you are looking for that, golden door that is really in alignment with who you really are, you need time to figure out who you want to be, actually. What you want and what your mission is, so that you could fully be present to step into those shoes. So I appreciate your generosity and talking about your journey, because I think it encourages people to know that it's just normal, that it takes time.
Yeah. And I think that maybe one thing to mention also is that sometimes if you have to do a job that's not what you want to do, because and not everybody has somebody that's like paying their bills for them. Most people probably don't have somebody paying their bills for them. So sometimes you have to take a job that's just, so that you can make it through. But if you can find other opportunities to volunteer in your spare time, to stay attached to that mission that you want to do, or, write articles, or launch a podcast, or do interviews, or anything that you can do to keep you attached to that what your mission is, while you're doing something different, that, even if it's not related to what you want to do later, you're still going to gain skills in that job. You're still going to be learning something that you can then, I think it's also later on finding the words to convince recruiters and different people how that experience is valuable and how it's bringing something to them as well, which I think it took me many years to figure out how to get to that space where I could frame my own journey and narrative in a way that, showed all of the value that those different jobs brought to me. And I will admit, it took me a while to get there. I was confronted in so many situations where I had interviews where they would say, oh, because I wasn't looking for a specific job. I wanted to work in a specific subject. I would apply for a communications job and they said, oh, well, you didn't do communications before. So then I would go find another job where I was doing communications, and then I apply for programs. And well, you didn't do programs before. Like, okay, well, I'll go do some programs. I'll come back. And it's like, well, now you can't tell me I haven't done anything.
Right. There's a lot of dues that have been paid. And I think one of the ways that I also want to extract from your experience and also my own is that nothing gets wasted. I think there are parts in my journey where I'm like, oh my gosh, is this ever going to pay off? Because I've really invested a lot of energy and time and money into my own advancement and development. And I'm like, is it ever going to pay off? Sometimes I would think that. And I'm just so happy that I think that, for both of us, it has paid off or it is paying off. And I just want people to remember that whatever it is that you've invested, it will come back to you. So just trust the journey and keep going. So I have one last question, actually two last questions, but in my own experience, because I did also try to explore a career in foundations, but the opportunities are few and far in between, I would say, right? So what are some of the ways that people could set themselves up for success, even if there are, few, if the opportunities are few and far?
That's a good question. I still think the networking piece is really important. Like we just recently opened up a position at the foundation in London and we had over 600 applicants, I think. So, part of it is, doing your CV so that it's going to stand out, writing the cover letter that's going to make you stand out as well, so that it comes out of all of those 600 applications so that yours stands out. I don't know if some of it is also just a little bit of luck,
They always say that luck is just like preparation meeting opportunity.
Right.
Yeah. And I like the idea of encouraging people to network, but also build relationships. Yeah. And what I always tell people is stop focusing on what you can get out of people, focus on what you can give to people, because when you're coming from a place where how could I be of service instead of what can you give me, that creates better connections and better opportunities.
Yeah. Right? Definitely. And I think it's really hard when you're in the position of looking for work, because people sense that, I think sometimes, that you want something out of them, that you're hoping that this conversation is going to lead to a job. So if you approach it from the sense, or, not saying, hey, I'm looking for a job in this industry, I'd love to hear your feedback on blah, blah, blah. But if, you come in and you're just saying, I'm really interested in the work that you do, I want to learn more.
How can I help?
How can I help? Yeah, I think that's a different approach. And it's interesting that what you just said, because I was just on LinkedIn yesterday and saw this random post where the person was saying, I hired this guy 10 minutes after receiving his message, and he was I think a social entrepreneur, and this guy sent him a message hey, I just Googled your name and saw that you didn't have a Wikipedia page, so I just decided to make one for you because I thought it would be helpful. And it was and then he, I don't know anything more than the story than this LinkedIn post that I saw, but he's
that's amazing.
He saw that I had a gap and he filled it for me. So
exactly. That's what I always tell people. I'm look at your cover letter, not as a way to showcase or exhibit your accomplishments, but more about how you can leverage your past experiences to solve that person's problem. Because essentially that's what a role does. If you're going to get hired somewhere, it's because they see that you could solve a problem for them.
Yeah.
Or add value to your team.
And if you know where you your dream place to work is, or you have a couple of ideas where your dream place to work is, don't wait until they're publishing job offers. Contact the people that work there and try to get to know them. Try to actually see if it is actually a place that you would really be interested in working in. Just do some networking. Just send them a message on LinkedIn. I think that you have a really interesting career path and I'd love to know more about it, and could you tell me more about your work? Not everybody's going to respond because we're all super busy, and I try to respond as much as possible to those requests, but I will admit that sometimes I'm not able to respond every single time, but I mean, I so appreciate the people that did that for me that I do try to do it as much as I possibly can as well on my side.
I love that Wikipedia example. So hopefully people remember that. But, I do want people to trust that I think in both of our cases, like, the work has paid off. And there's just, again, like the more specific you are about your mission, sometimes you get a little bit more trials ahead of the way because you're also being prepared for a mission that's bigger than yourself. And you need a lot of strength and a lot of resilience to meet that moment. So
and all of that forges your character, and even when you do land your dream job, it doesn't like mean all of the challenges are over. Like you'll still face challenges in your everyday work. There's still things that get complicated or can get frustrating, and it's not just like you found your dream job and then everything is wonderful after.
No, like the challenge,
all of those things that you do through help you build the resilience to also get through those everyday challenges that you face at work.
Absolutely.
Well, not necessarily everyday challenge, but every once in a while challenges.
Yes. Well, so the last question would be, you're very generous in, saying that you are, happy to connect with people when you can. Where could people find you if they want to learn more about your work?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn. So anybody can contact me on LinkedIn. I am, I have like an Instagram account, but honestly, I'm not super active on social media, but LinkedIn would probably be the best place.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Shawna, for your generosity and your transparency and for sharing all the grit behind the glamour of it all. And for those who are tuned in or who have listened, thank you so much for joining us on this episode. I hope that this encouraged you. I hope that this informed your path and on your journey towards creating the change that you really want to make. Thank you so much for joining us. And I hope you'll tune in to the next episode of Grit and Glamour. Until next time, bye.